Hello, everyone. I'm Ksenija Svetlova, a senior research analyst at the IPS, Institute for Policy and Strategy at Reychman University. And now we will be discussing the presence and expanding influence of Russia in the Middle East. I'm very happy to present my co-panelist, Mr. Matthew Rojansky, Director of Kennan Institute, Woodrow Wilson Center, Washington, D.C. Hi, Matt. And along with me, it's Major General Reserve Amos Gilad, Executive Director, Institute for Policy and Strategy, the IPS at Reychman University. Matt, Amos, it's good to be here with you again. As I told you, we're going to discuss the difference in attitudes that exist, the American and the Israeli perspective, as also was seen by us in the report that was recently published by the IPS and Kennan. It's a co-production that was published in May, in which we performed basically the analysis and presented the various attitudes that exist in Jerusalem and in Washington towards the increasing Russian presence here in the region. So, Matt, let me first of all pose a question to you. With everything that is going on right now in the region, starting from the fall of Lebanon and the Arab attempt to change the intergame right now in Syria, how do you see in Washington the place of Russia in the Middle East? What are the challenges? And how do you believe things will be developed during the next few months?
Well, thank you very much, Ksenija, for having me. I really enjoyed our work together throughout two rounds of this U.S.-Israel task force on Russia. I think the report, which you can find on the Kennan Institute and the IDC website, really speaks for itself. But it was never meant to be a snapshot in time. The report, of course, was released most recently in May of this year, but you mentioned some things already that have, there have been other global changes since May, quite significant. There are some really pressing crises happening right now, in particular involving Russia and the United States and the West. And so I think the essence of what we've done is to create a dialogue between the U.S. and Israeli expert community that looks at Russia. And that's where I come around to maybe answering your question, though I think it will be unsatisfying. And that is that you can't, from an American perspective at least, you can't just answer a question about Russia and the Middle East. You have to look at the broader question of the U.S.-Russia relationship, and that's very much a work in progress. President Biden in April, at the same time that he announced the summit meeting with Vladimir Putin, which then took place in June, he laid out essentially three principles to his engagement with Russia. He said, where it makes sense for the United States to cooperate with Russia, we will do so. We won't be afraid to do so. Where Russia poses threats and challenges, we will resist, we'll push back. And of course, we will remain true to American allies, American principles, American interests, and the American people. This, to my mind, is not a new formulation. This is the essence of sensible American policy towards Russia. It's always going to be a mixture of cooperation where it's necessary for both sides and pushback. And I think that the Middle East is an example of this. You saw the necessity for cooperation and dialogue over the last several years. It was dubbed deconfliction in Syria so as to avoid, certain unacceptable terms. But essentially, this was at quite a serious level within the uniformed military, the United States and Russia agreeing that they would not work at cross purposes and that they would not risk provoking one another in Syria. In a broader political sense, we saw that there were, in fact, if not explicitly common interests, there were common accepted positions. For example, neither side was particularly eager to see the growth of Iranian power in Syria. Neither side was eager to see threats to Israel's security growing. Neither side, although there was never total agreement about the particular groups and targets which should be considered valid, neither side was eager to see the growth of Islamic State capabilities in Syria and the wider region. So you had a kind of modus vivendi in Syria over the last several years that I think speaks to the broader recognition in Washington that Russia plays a role in the Middle East, that it does so by virtue of its long-standing relationships and its ability to project power. But I think that's where the U.S.-Israel partnership comes in, because the United States cannot be everywhere all the time in the Middle East. And I think in the last several months, certainly since the release of our report, the dramatic experience of the American pullout from Afghanistan has reminded a lot of people that although the United States has great capabilities and certainly has the ability to project power, the notion that we will seek to be everywhere at once, especially in a dynamic region like the Middle East, where there is always a new crisis that demands something from Washington, I think that needs to be reassessed. And the last point I'll make is context. Again, we have, I would say, an acute phase of the Russian security challenge in Europe right now. Due to the Russian buildup of forces on the border with Ukraine. That's a huge concern for the United States. You've seen that at the highest levels. The migrant crisis on the border between Belarus and Poland and Belarus and Lithuania, and an ongoing energy crunch in Europe. I think those factors combine to really focus American attention on Russia in Europe, which has historically been the central front in this very difficult relationship, and not the Middle East.
Thank you very much, Matt. And I absolutely agree. The United States cannot be everywhere. And more so, we see that America is, its focus, it's elsewhere during the last at least 3 administrations. It seems that America wants to focus on China, on Southeast Asia, on Russia, and less on the Middle East. But when America is looking at the Middle East, it's looking for afar. While Amos, we here in Israel, we are looking at Russia's presence in Syria, and it's actually beyond the border. It's just right here around the corner. Amos, I would like to ask you, given your rich experience here in the Middle Eastern affairs and also direct contacts also that you had during your job at the Ministry of Defense, with the Russian side, how should Israel, keep working and manipulating, basically maneuvering between US, its only strategic ally, and between Russia, that a few years ago became its immediate neighbor here in the north, in Syria?
Thank you, Ksenija. From Israeli point of view, Iran is the main threat, strategic threat to Israel. And if Iran gets a military nuclear bomb or capabilities, it might become even existential threat in 2 arenas, the nuclear and the regional arena. Syria is very important. Now in Syria, thanks God, we are enjoying common ground with Russia. It's not official policy of Russia, but if we analyze the situation there, the Russians are not happy. At least this is my judgment from the growing presence of Iran in Syria. It seems that Iran wants to take over Syria, and Golan Heights might become a hostile front against Israel. And the Russians don't like the growing Iranian presence in Syria. So unofficially, of course, it's not official policy, we do have free hand to, according to international press, we are intensifying our military operational activities in Syria against the Iranian presence, I think with great and significant success. And for that, because of the Russian presence in Syria, we need their consent or at least silent coordination. And that's why the visit of our Prime Minister, Mr. Naftali Bennett, was uniquely important, because I don't know the details haven't been published, but it seems that the coordination is very solid and powerful. It enables Israel to concentrate on the efforts to prevent the growing presence. Growing presence, it means that they want to establish a powerful military hostile presence against Israel with revolutionary guards, with Shiite militias, and so on, with armed UAVs, missiles, rockets, and so on, and we need to prevent it. And I think in Syria, we enjoy unique success, and that's why we need to continue our cooperation and coordination with Russia, in spite of all other dimensions that are so typical to the Russian EU and US relationships that are characterized by tension and other others conflicts of interest.
Thank you very much, Amos. And I would just like to add that we are right now find ourselves in the unique period of time in which there is a convergence of interests between Russia, the Arab countries, the Sunni Arab countries, and Israel, because all of the players in more or lesser degree are interested in pushing Iran, if not away, but then maybe a little bit far away from the centers of power in Syria. And it seems that the UAE leader, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, also the Jordanian king, King Abdullah, they are working very hard in order to bring back Syria to the Arab fold and basically to take it away from the arms of the Iranians. The question is whether it's actually, something that can be achieved, whether, the Arabs will indeed enter Syria and put their money on Syrian infrastructure. For now, it seems, very unlikely and very far-fetched, because we are talking about unstable country where the situation is going from bad to worse. But in this regard, it's important to mention another Arab player, the weak chain. It's, of course, the Lebanon, where all of these interests, they mix and blend. And of course, Lebanon is important to the Arab world. And the Arabs will try to do everything in order to save Lebanon from falling. The big question is whether all of these powers that will be working together, if they will work together, there is a big if, will eventually achieve success. Matthew and Amos, I will ask you, because we are reaching to the end of our discussion, I would ask you to summarize, perhaps, to give the bottom line of your vision of how will Russia behave in the Middle East during the future next few months, perhaps years. What would be the American reaction and how it will affect Israel? I know it's tough, but I know you can do it. You have approximately a minute each, please. Matthew, we'll start with you.
Well, the prediction will be worth exactly what you paid for it. And so I hope it won't disappoint. But my expectation is that Russia will continue to behave in an opportunistic way. So this will depend on where crisis occurs, where there are gaps in governance that can be exploited. I do not think Russia has reliable allies, partners, or what you would call permanent interests in the Middle East. It has situational and opportunistic interests. I think this is appreciated in Washington. And the difference is that the United States does have permanent interests and relationships in the Middle East, and it begins with Israel, although it's not exclusive to Israel.
Okay, Amos, please.
We need to be able to continue our unique, useful, successful operations, allegedly, in Syria in order to prevent the growing presence of Iran, Revolutionary Guards, Hezbollah, and all these proxies against Israel. We need, of course, to be coordinated with the United States. The United States is our major pillar of our national security, and we need to be fully coordinated. However, we need to continue our coordination and cooperation with Russia in order to be able to achieve our main goal, to prevent the growing presence of hostile Iran in Syria. And if we look at the whole area, we do have Lebanon, Hezbollah, Yemen, and other areas, and Syria is key area to prevent the growing presence of Iran. And we need to be sure that Russia will support us in our efforts in the nuclear arena in order to prevent, it must be prevented, that Iran will never get nuclear weapon.
Thank you, Amos. We are almost finished. I'll just add briefly that in the era of uncertainty, when the Arab states and also Israel fears the US departure from the Middle East and disengagement from the Middle Eastern many conflicts, it seems that it's almost inevitable that Russia will gain more opportunities. It will be seen as the second superpower that will be working here for quite amount of time, that it will be staying here and building its bases here, military bases, but also civilian power of base all across the Middle East. So we will follow. And Amos and Matthew, thank you so very much for your input. It was a pleasure to discuss with you Russia and the Middle East as usual. Thank you and shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you.